Aloha! Here we are, together again, Botany 101, and my name is Angela Nishimoto. Okay. So today, we're doing stimulating beverages. Doesn't that sound great? I believe in that. Okay. Our objectives for today include, and we only have a couple, but they're quite stimulating, and you have coffee, tea, and chocolate. I wish you coffee, tea, and chocolate. And we're also talking about Coca-Cola and other drinks as well. So what do these all have in common? Okay, they have caffeine. Now caffeine is a chemical, of course, it is a chemical type which we call an alkaloid. And alkaloids are certain kind of chemicals, usually from plants. Now in the plants, what does it do? Okay, because remember, when plants are doing something, they're producing a product, they're not doing it for us. Okay, they're doing it for themselves. Some scientists believe that plants have caffeine in them and other related alkaloids to actually protect them from something coming to eat them. Something coming along, walking along, taking a bite, and oh, it doesn't taste so good, okay? Anyway, alkaloids for the plant, maybe for protection. For us, okay, what is this caffeine here? So here we have one image of caffeine. You can see it has nitrogens, it has oxygens. It is an organic compound after all too, okay? You can infer that the carbons are located various, like here and here and here and etc. Yeah? So the carbons are there. See, so caffeine produced from plants. Here's another image, three-dimensional shape here, looks very nice, very good. You see where the nitrogens are, it's kind of like a space-filling image. What does it do? It stimulates the central nervous system. Okay, the central nervous system, CNS. And what is the central nervous system? Well, it's part of our bodies, okay, and it includes the brain and the spinal cord, right? Pretty much, that's the central nervous system. They call it central because it's pretty central, yeah, your head, in your head, under your skull, okay, and your backbone, all right, in your backbone. So in the central nervous system, the this particular alkaloid works to stimulate us, okay, makes us think faster, makes us talk faster. There's a whole bunch of different kind of effects that we can expect from caffeine, okay, mainly a stimulant to the central nervous system. That can mean all kinds of things, which we'll find out. It can give you pep, okay? Say you're kind of lagging, you wake up in the morning, you go, oh no, I don't want to go to work. Well, what can you do? You can have a cup of coffee, you can have a cup of tea, whatever with your breakfast, and then that'll kind of gear you up. You'll kind of gird your loins, for the day. So it can pep you up, make you stimulated. Like I'm a little stimulated. I had a little bit of some cake a little while ago, so I'm a little caffeinated because I'm kind of sensitive to chemicals. Anyway, so it can pep you up, give you so-called energy. Okay, that's one thing that caffeine can do. Okay. Another thing it can do, it can actually improve your physical performance when you're doing any kind of exercise. So here, it's a young lady swimming, for one thing. She looks like she's doing, the, what do you call that? The breaststroke. And this young fellow here, look at this, he looks like he's in very good shape. He's running through the water. So whenever you do this kind of resistance training, where you're training in a resistant fashion, the movement of your body is working against the water, the pressure of the water against your body, okay? So caffeine can actually let you perform better physically, okay, for different kinds of tasks, including these physical sorts, exercising. Another thing which can be very good for caffeine, if you're concerned about weight, is that, usually when you're using energy that's stored in your body, generally you're going to have it from the glycogen that's stored in your muscle cells and also in your liver. Okay, so your glycogen is then broken down into blood sugar, glucose, and etc. But when you're actually taking caffeine, that can kind of let an avenue open up so you can actually draw on fat that your body has stored. Everybody knows pretty much that fat that you have on your body is not easy to lose. In fact, all your fat cells, your adipocytes, you always have as many as you do have. Even if you lose a lot of weight, you still have all the fat cells that you ever had. It's just that they've gotten smaller, okay? So here is a triglyceride, a typical kind of fat. This part here is one tail, this one here is another, and this is a third. And here's a glycerol, so here's a triglyceride. It takes a little bit of an interpretation to look at this. This area with this little parenthesis is showing that this structure is repeated to an X power or to a Y power or to a Z power. So this is actually a whole chain of hydrocarbons. And here you have this little asterisk just saying that they could have something else at the end here, okay? Anyway, so stored fat. So caffeine, one of the things that you'll see in diet pills, stuff that people are taking so they can lose weight, oftentimes has a lot of caffeine in it because that will help you metabolize the fat in your body. Okay, because in the United States, you know, in our current world that we live in right now, people consider fat to be bad. Okay, it's not necessarily bad. Fat is just fat, you know. It's not really in itself good or bad. Now, another thing that caffeine can do for you, if this is what you want to go, is that it increases your dexterity with fine hand motions, especially when you're doing something that you've done before, crocheting, knitting, sewing, putting machine parts together, doing any kind of work that requires fine motor skills that you've already learned, that's already ingrained in your brain, that you know how to do it. You can go it faster, you can do it more efficiently on caffeine, okay? On stimulants, okay? Another thing that caffeine has been used for, a lot of drug companies, including makers of aspirin and etc., you know, acetaminophen, you can actually take caffeine with pain relievers and they will enhance the effect of pain relievers. Another thing, if you're so unfortunate as to have most people will hurt their back sometimes. Sometimes what the doctor will do, they'll give you a prescription pain reliever. And boy, when you look on the pain reliever, look at their ingredients, sometimes they have like 250 milligrams of caffeine in it. And what it is that this particular pain reliever does actually help, you know, in terms of getting the caffeine will help the pain relievers to do their work better. So I remember I had a friend, and she kind of she had another friend, and she said, "Oh no, so and so, she'll actually take her pain relievers with Coca-Cola." And then I just and she didn't know at the time that the Coca-Cola would be actually enhancing it. She thought of drugs, that this woman was taking drugs and mixing drugs together. You know, that wasn't actually the case. What actually is happening is that maybe the sugar in the Coca-Cola was acting maybe like a carrier into the cell. Don't know, maybe that. But also the caffeine in Coca-Cola or in coffee or in tea can actually help the pain reliever do more work. I think that this particular woman would have migraine headaches. And not just that, is that when you have migraine headaches, generally what that means is your blood vessels are dilated. Caffeine actually helps to constrict your blood vessels. Okay, so that can actually help with headaches. Okay, so here's another kind of image. Here, what we hear. And then we also find that caffeine also acts as an antioxidant. This is great. Remember, one of the things that causes cell aging and cell death is oxidation, the breakdown of a chemical or some kind of substance by oxygen. So oxygen, remember, a product of photosynthesis. Remember, it's one of the main products of photosynthesis, a byproduct of photosynthesis. All living things practically need oxygen now. We needed to do cellular aerobic respiration. But remember too, oxygen was one of the Earth's first air pollutants. And oxygen does break other things down. Oxidation, cell death is actually something that happens because of the presence of oxygen and some of its intermediate forms and etc. So caffeine can work as an antioxidant, can help to offset the damage that oxygen can do to our bodies, to our cells. Okay? We have those superoxide radicals and all that other kind of stuff, you know. So, so caffeine can act as an antioxidant, okay? Now, this caffeine also can have negative effects. For one thing, caffeine is addictive, physically addictive, okay? And if somebody is addicted to caffeine or takes in a lot of caffeine, for one thing, so if you do take in a lot of caffeine, you can actually have sleepless nights. You know, your mind is firing. Remember, caffeine is a stimulant to the central nervous system. So your mind, your neurons, your nerve cells in your brain, firing. So you can't fall asleep. You're just all too wound up, okay? Nervousness, irritability too. You notice when somebody's really stressed out, they get really grouchy. Well, same thing when you've taken a lot of caffeine. The person can get to be really irritable. And here, this looks like, I think it's called a sagittal section through somebody's head. Okay, a dead person's head. This person isn't alive. but we're just kind of showing the location of several glands, including the hypothalamus, right? So that actually is like one of the main pathways, and I know that the caffeine can actually speed up your metabolism, which is governed, okay, by your various glands. Another thing, because it's addictive, generally if you drink, like even if you only drink two cups of coffee in one day or one morning, that's all you have all day. What can happen is that if you just stop drinking coffee, you can get a lot of different kinds of withdrawal symptoms, including nervousness, including irritability, just like any other kind of substance that you're addicted to. It's not going to be as full-blown as something, much more serious. I'm not more serious, but more dramatic. Say that if somebody was addicted to morphine or one of those opiates, yeah? But you will probably have withdrawal symptoms, including headaches, bad headaches. Now, one of the main plants that give us caffeine, of course, is coffee, okay, coffee. Coffea arabica, and of course it comes from a plant. So here are some coffee plants. You can see they're relatively small trees, and these are just ablazing, just blooming with flowers here. So they have white flowers, okay, very, very attractive plant. I'm going to go into some of the characteristics of these plants. Excuse me. For one thing, okay, the origins of coffee is shrouded in mystery, okay, shrouded in myth, all right? So the origins, nobody knows exactly how it originated, but people believe that coffee originated in the highlands of Ethiopia in Africa, okay? So the story goes that there are a goat herd. Now this man is a goat herd, yeah? He actually has a whole bunch of goats, yeah? So a shepherd, of course, herds sheep, is like a person who pays attention to and makes sure that the sheep get into the fold and they go where they're supposed to. They kind of take care of it. So a cow herd herds cows, and a goat herd herds goats. So generally in Ethiopia and places in the Middle East, a lot of people are goat herds, yeah? So what happened is that the goats were actually out there foraging, eating whatever's there, and they came back when they were friskier. They had more energy, jumping around and playing and all this kind of stuff. So the goat herd went out and he investigated, and he found out that they were eating these fruits of a particular kind of tree. The story goes that this person that we don't know his name, that he went out and he tried some of this, and it made him pretty frisky and pretty stimulated too. So then what they did is that eventually people in that area of the world, in the Ethiopian highlands, in the area surrounding there, they started making like a cake. They'd actually get the fruit or the seed inside, mash it up, and add some fat to it maybe, and eat it as a food and as an energizing food. Okay, so this is like, sort of the beginning. So here we're having coffee, a mythic beginning, because nobody exactly knows how people ever found out about it. Okay, and this plant, of course, is native to Ethiopia, especially the highland areas. And here's Ethiopia here, okay, right at the tip, near the tip of the Arabian Peninsula here in Eastern Africa, okay, Eastern area. And here, nice, beautiful view of the Ethiopian highlands here. It looks like a goat, I think, yeah. So of course, goats, they can jump all over the place. They're just amazing animals. I think that they're kind of sweet, I don't know if I would like myself to eat goat meat, but people have different things. I guess because when I was younger, we had a pet goat named Maggie. Okay, so what happened was people ate it, and then about the 1200s in Yemen, which is located here, yeah, at the tip of the Arabian Peninsula, people started roasting the seeds and then grinding it to make a beverage. Okay, so the first use of coffee in a style that we know it happened around the 1200s. Think about this. This is what, 900 years ago. Yeah, 900, 800 years ago, something like that, right? Kind of a long time ago. Okay, so people roasted the seeds. So these are the seeds. Generally, the fruits have one or two of these coffee nibs in there, two of these seeds. Usually they have two, sometimes they only have one, okay? But in Yemen, in the 1200s. Then what happened is that the coffee, since it stimulated people, it was used to keep people up, okay, in the Arab world. Okay, so even now, if you go to Turkey or places where you have people who are Islamic, you have a lot of coffee places, and this is something that people use. What did they use it for? They used it for mostly staying up so they could pray, so they could study, so they could do their religious stuff, okay? So another thing then this use in a religious sense then got translated into a social drinking sort of thing. Okay, so this is an image of a coffee house, okay, somewhere in the Arab world. I'm not exactly sure where. I think I had the notes for this someplace, but I forgot in the interim time. Sorry about that. And here, this is in the modern world. You see these men in I don't know what country this is. I think this is in Syria. But you have these men. Here's one man with a tobacco cigarette here. Here's another man. He's kind of drawing on a hookah. You know, hookah, which is a way some people take in smoke. They will actually smoke. I guess the water cools the smoke or something like that. And here they have their coffee, very thick, maybe Turkish coffee. I'm not exactly sure, but I think it's in that area there someplace. But still, coffee houses, very important, okay? Think of Starbucks, okay? Think of what used to be Borders Cafe that doesn't exist anymore, okay? Anyway, from that area then, it was actually taken to Europe in the 1600s, okay? Coffee itself, all right? And in the 1700s, you had the birth of coffee houses in Europe. Coffee houses, very important. Coffee houses were places where people talked business, people talked about art. They went on and on talking about art, talking about the philosophy of art, talking about all kinds of stuff. Intellectual discussions, you had salons, and probably people served coffee in salons, you know, some of these very important women who were sort of like running salons with very important men speaking about very important ideas, discussions, and politics. You see these people here? D'Alembert, Diderot, Rousseau, Montesquieu, and one more that we'll see in a bit. These are people that in World Civ you will have found out that they were what they call the philosophes. What are philosophes? Soph means wisdom. Sophia is a word that means wisdom, okay? And, or Sophie or Sophia. And phil, it means to love. You know, like you can talk about hydrophile, something that loves water, okay? So philosophes are people who loved ideas. Coffee houses, central nervous system stimulants, a lot of talking, a lot of passion, okay? These are people who seeded what we later now we call the French Revolution, okay? Very important to Western civilization, due in part to coffee houses. In fact, this is the man, Voltaire, author of Candide, which I haven't read, but someday maybe I will. Anyway, so here you have all these different things, fomenting all kinds of stuff, including revolution. And in fact, I think in one point in history, I think that they tried to outlaw coffee houses because people were just getting all fired up, all stimulated, and getting ideas. That's the one thing, is that we humans, this is one thing that people can never erase out of our particular species. We can think, you know? So caffeine, coffee, apparently fueled that, because what you had is you had these authors of the French Revolution. They were the intellectual framework for what you could hang the French Revolution on, sort of like a kind of an embarrassing way to put it. But at the same time, the French Revolution fueled also the American Revolution. They fueled each other. I just a while ago found out, you know, somebody was kind enough to inform me that generally the American Revolution happened first. But this is something that they're talking about in Europe. French and Americans, they fed off of each other in terms of ideas, exchange ideas. Benjamin Franklin actually was greatly beloved and esteemed by the French. Okay, a lot of Americans, the founding fathers of the time, didn't really look down on Franklin necessarily, but they raised their eyebrows at him sort of because he was a tradesman. He was not a gentleman, not like a gentleman planter, as they might call it. Okay, but he was a very brilliant fellow, you know. Anyway, so the French Revolution, the American Revolution sort of inspired each other. Okay, because at the time people were talking about the common man. Rousseau, whose image that we saw just a little while ago, he was a philosopher, and he had that idea of what was it called, the noble savage. You know, people were going back, hearkening back. So this is sort of like the beginnings of the Romanticism in a way, yeah? Because what you had is people looking to the common man, everyday people, as being more interesting. In the past, it'd be focus on the aristocrats, focus on people who are highborn, the kings and the queens, divine right of descent, things like that. But then here you had more secular thoughts, that maybe all humans have a right to live and have a right to certain inalienable rights, like it says in our Constitution. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This stuff isn't unimportant. It is extremely important. This is one of the reasons why we get to say what we want to say anytime we want to, pretty much. Okay, you can say almost anything you like because we have that freedom. That hasn't been true for most people in the world during most of human history, okay, or prehistory. Okay, anyway, then you had the coffee spreading to North America. furthermore into the 1600s, okay? And then from the 1600s, okay, you had a resurgence later on. It sort of died down a little bit between the 1600s and the 1960s, but still there were coffee shops because we'll talk about something a little later. Coffee sort of became the drink of choice for Americans. So in the 1960s, what happened in the 1950s and the 1960s? I think of beatniks, right? The people with the berets and wearing all black and snapping their fingers and things like that. You had the beatniks, and then later you had people, you know, students and stuff going into coffee shops and also at that point talking about revolution, even though that's something that didn't really happen, but still it impacted the world. So coffee has had an impact in world history, okay? Amazing. A humble being, you know, can do that. It's what we call a bean. Now we're going to go into the plant, okay? So generally, the plant itself is not that is actually an attractive plant, glossy leaves. It's a small tree or shrub, okay? Another thing about it is the leaves are simple. That means that the leaf is all in one piece. Remember simple leaves and compound leaves, right? And generally, it has a small white flower. After pollination and fertilization, it develops into something that they call a cherry. I guess they call it a coffee cherry because it's red, okay? Now generally the plant, even though it is from highland area of Ethiopia, so it likes cool kind of weather, mostly cool, so it can grow in the tropics or subtropics. It doesn't like temperate. It will not survive a freeze, okay? The plant needs to have pretty mild weather, okay? But it likes to grow in the cool highlands, like this cool highlands of Ethiopia, right? And another thing is that generally coffee oftentimes needs to be protected. So this is not showing that well a little bit, but these are some of the trees. I guess they prune them back that this plantation has grown to actually shelter the coffee trees. They're like mother of coffee. There are trees that allow the coffee trees to grow and flower and fruit in shade. I think coffee also doesn't like wind either. They're sensitive to wind damage as well. And so here in Hawaii too, what happens? Some people who have not coffee business, but you actually have people with going over to Kona. They actually have people whose families maybe own a coffee plantation, Kona coffee, premium coffee, known the world over, and I think it was very right for people to actually try to copyright the name and make sure the quality and the standards went high. It's like once you lose quality, once you lose quality for a product, you can't ever get it again. You know, it's like losing a good reputation. It really is true. You know, it's so difficult to get back a good reputation if you have lost it. Okay? Anyway, so Kona coffee, some people in Hawaii might have memories of, you know, in the summertime or whenever they harvest, flying over to Kona from Oahu and helping their family on the Big Island pick coffee, you know? Because generally, in many places, they still hand pick it. Even though if you grow it in kind of gently rolling kind of slopes, you can actually use mechanical harvesters. They'll actually grab the tree and shake it and shake the fruits off the tree, you know? So usually the fruits are hand-picked. Okay, another thing that you see here, that these fruits that are red are ripe, but you have a whole bunch that are not ripe yet. Okay, so I guess we can thank the fact that the plants actually have an abscission zone that allows it to fall off. If a coffee picker, you know, if a machine is used to pick it, they see that one of those machines can actually do the work of 100 pickers, you know. Another thing, what happens next is that it's depulped. What that means is that the pulp around the seed or the seeds are removed, and then the seed coats around the seeds are removed also, okay? Then they roast the seeds as well, okay? And then once you roast the seed, then it makes it more liable to break down. So usually the freshly roasted coffee beans and freshly ground coffee beans are supposed to be the best. So people who are real coffee connoisseurs, they can tell the difference. If you actually had a little bag of coffee sitting in your freezer for 2 or 3 months, people can tell that it's not as fresh as it might be, you know? So when you buy coffee, and you know, you have sales at some of the drugstores and supermarkets and such, a good thing to do is just buy as much that you can use, like within a month or so, you know, if you drink coffee on a regular basis. I usually don't, because it just makes me much too hyper, you know? Okay, so from bean to brew, what happens? Okay, first of all, so what the smell like? So one of the great things about coffee is the way it smells. It smells wonderful, yeah, in the morning. And the taste of it too, it depends on how, what temperatures you roast it at, okay, as well as how long you roast it and etc. Okay, so for light roast, generally people roast the coffee beans, what they call the beans, about 414 to about 424 degrees Fahrenheit, okay? I use Fahrenheit here not because I don't have the Celsius temperatures, but because for a lot of Americans, this actually makes more sense to them than, like if you say something Celsius, for most people, almost everybody, it doesn't mean anything to them. They don't feel like a point of reference for that. Okay? Then we also have the fact that generally the higher the temperature that the bean is roasted at, the darker the beans will be. So you have everything from a really light roast all the way to a black roast, which has like more and more flavor. So I guess the lighter roasts are also sweeter, okay? Lighter roasts are sweeter, darker roasts maybe less sweet, or some people might call bitter, more bitter. So this is actually about the color of the cherry. It's sort of like a olivey, light olive green color, yeah? And then of course you see this whole gradation depending on who's doing the roasting, how long they're roasting it, what temperature, yeah? So when you do have coffee, it's best to use it, when it's freshly roasted and freshly ground, because it will actually start to deteriorate soon after you roast it. Okay, so best uses of coffee. If you can, use one bag of coffee and then get another one after you do that. That's probably the best coffee if that's what you like. Okay, so if we look here, if you want to look here under the Elmo, I have a little a bag of coffee here, nice coffee made from Hawaii Coffee Roasters. This is pretty good coffee, and you can see that here in Hawaii, of course, we have a lot of premium coffees, but this one here has some chocolate and macadamia added to it too. Some people really, really like the flavored coffees in that way. Some people really, really can't stand them, but still, it's nice, to be able to have this kind of choice. This is something that we in Hawaii and in the United States, we're very fortunate. We have the luxury of choice. Not everybody has that, but still, people like coffee. It's a good thing. Now, instant coffee. Okay, instant coffee came into being in 1901. Enterprising fellow found a way to actually, what he did, he actually got brewed coffee, and then he dried it up really fast and crystallized it. Okay, so that's what we call instant coffee. I remember too, instant coffee. One memory that I remember is that I think my mom had been at work. I was maybe about 10 or 11 years old at the time, and the lady from our church, one of the ladies from our church came to visit, and my father said, "Oh, go make some coffee." I thought, I don't know how to make coffee. So I got, the whatever it was, Folgers instant coffee. And I thought, well, because I was anxious. I was like, oh no, what if I mess up? So then what I thought is, oh, if I get it to them fast, I won't have to worry about it so much. So what I did is I ran the hot tap water and put it in the cups, and then spooned the instant coffee in there. And of course it was terrible. So anyway, that's what I remember when I think of instant coffee. That was the first time I ever made coffee at 10 or 11 years old, something like that. Anyway, that's just a little side thing. And if we look on the computer now, here's an image of some instant coffee. Yeah, so it does. I guess they actually make it look this way because they wanted to make it look like ground coffee. You wanted to, the psychological thing. So one of the big things you do is when you're introducing some kind of product on the market, you have to actually get somebody to want to buy it. And sometimes you can get them to buy it if you can associate what you're selling with something else or the same thing but better. You know what I mean? If you can get a good association in the mind of your consumer, then they're more likely to buy it. And here's a little cup of, I think this is instant coffee here. A lady looking very happy and relaxed there, maybe a coffee drinker. Now we have what your text calls variations on a bean, and I like that, so I kept that. That's really, really good. First of all, a lot of times if you go to coffee shops, coffee shops designated as such, and there are a bunch of them in Hawaii, yeah? This is like something that has actually happened for maybe the last 10 years or more, So here you have something called espresso. Espresso coffee, pretty much what espresso. So what it is you have tightly packed coffee grounds, ground coffee beans, tightly packed into it, and then they force steam and hot water through it. So what you'll have is like a thick rich coffee, very strong taste, is very concentrated. So it's almost what I imagine Turkish coffee to be, because I think people in Arab countries still drink their coffee in very small cups and very, very, very strong, lots of sugar inside. So it sounds really delicious, but boy, I think that could probably keep you up 2 nights or something too. Anyway, so you have espresso, okay, very strong taste, concentrated. This is one of those kind of coffee drinks that you could get at a specialty coffee shop, okay? You also have something called a latte, all right? So pretty much a latte is espresso with steamed milk added to it, okay? It's pretty good, but like this too, this is another thing that can cost you $4. And if you want to tip the person, that's $5 gone already, but still. I think it's a nice treat, and it's okay people to spend money on that, but not for me. I don't think so. Mochas are very similar to latte. They're like they have espresso, steamed milk, and chocolate syrup. Okay, so mocha is pretty much like a coffee drink that has chocolate in it. Okay, and then we also have something called a cappuccino. Cappuccino is like espresso, except that it has like a head of foam milk on it. People like to kind of take off the head when they're drinking their cappuccinos. So these are all variations on coffee, and it's something that people really like. So the thing that's good, and in my opinion, it's kind of good to treat yourself to something nice like this on a very special occasion, maybe. You know, like if you just graduated from college or something, and your best friend wants to take you to a coffee shop, then you can order one of those premium drinks like that. I think that's really good, but then it can get to be really expensive if you get into the habit of ordering a latte every morning. $5 a day just on coffee, you know. That's just my own moral, ethical judgment. So everybody can do whatever they want with their money. It doesn't matter to me, but still, it is expensive. It can be expensive. Now the next group of plants we're going to be looking at, okay, are the tea plants, okay, Camellia sinensis. So this is in the camellia group, yeah, it's actually in the Theaceae, yeah, and this is actually the plant. Here it is, and usually when they're growing this plant, they keep it rather short, okay, they keep it rather small, because what they'll do is they need to pick the tea leaves from it, okay, TEA leaves, okay. Now the origins of this plant also, just like coffee, is shrouded in mystery, okay, shrouded in myth. So there's a story, Chinese people tell the story that the Chinese emperor, okay, in 2737 BC, he happened to be sitting down with a pot of water being boiled, and these leaves from a plant fell into his boiling water, and he tasted it, and it was good, okay. So this is like a depiction of the emperor. Okay, and one thing to remember sometimes is when you're looking at Asian art, is that oftentimes, I know in Japanese art, this is how it was, that if you look at an image that's supposed to be a person, almost never does it really look like the person. Because I think Japanese people, maybe Chinese people might have had the same thing. Japanese people, artists, one of the things they said, it was like the height of rudeness to actually depict somebody as they were, because I guess, you know, in Japan, people don't like to be different from each other, something like that. But I remember that from art history. They say in Japanese art, they don't ever make it look like the actual person. And a lot of the art depicting famous people, like this particular emperor, was probably drawn or painted centuries after the person had lived. So 2737 BC, what is that? That's more than 4,000 years ago, yeah? Anyway, so that's one story about the origin of tea. Another story of the origin of tea, okay, had an Indian priest, okay, his name Bodhidharma. Okay, here's a depiction of Bodhidharma, okay. Bodhidharma, what did he do? He vowed to contemplate Buddha and Buddha's teaching, okay. He vowed to, I came across 2 versions of the story. One of them was that he was going to stay awake for 7 years, no sleep. Okay. Another version of the story said he was going to stay awake for 9 years. Anyway, so he'd actually gone through years of this, and when he got to the 7th or the 8th year, something like that, he kept almost falling asleep. So in desperation, he grabbed some leaves of a nearby bush, stuffed it into his mouth, and chewed it, and he found that it kept him awake. Another version of the same story said that he was so angry at himself because he kept falling asleep when he wanted to be contemplating the Buddhist ideals or thinking about Buddha, contemplating, meditating, and such, that he actually cut his eyelids off. So this thing, which Japanese people call a daruma, Okay, they have these big staring eyes. They have these big eyes because, of course, the priest himself, he was an Indian. He was from India. Yeah, so I guess Indian people have larger eyes than Japanese people, and so you have these big staring eyes, and also the eyes are staring because he cut his eyelids off. And I think another version of the story also talked about that his legs were giving him problems, so he cut his legs off as well. Okay, it's kind of an extreme story, but this is true. I guess this is like a tale to tell people to kind of show the power of determination. My gosh. Anyway, so what they call a daruma is like a little, I should have brought one. I have a couple at home, but it's like a little kind of oval-shaped, egg-shaped sort of figure with a big head, big staring eyes. Usually one side is painted in, and when the person has received a daruma or gets one, they paint in with a wish or a goal. After they accomplish the goal, they paint in the other eye. They don't have to tell anybody about what their goal is. It could be finishing school. It could be getting engaged. It could be naming your first child. Anything very, very special that you're working toward. Okay, because of course, Bodhidharma, his story about, boy, getting kind of radical there, cutting his eyelids off and stuff. But still, determination and reaching your goal. So when you paint in that other eye, you can be happy, especially if it's something that you've been working for years. Once you've done something like that, I mean, it's just amazing, the feeling and happiness and the pride that you can take for doing what you have done. Okay? Now, tea, thought to be native to the areas, sort of between Tibet and China and India, in that little area there, Myanmar, which is also known as Burma. Right around here, kind of highland areas, okay? Right around here, okay, in this map of Asia, right? Now, history, okay, the history of this, okay, partly a little bit. First of all, okay, the Dutch first took tea to Holland in the 1600s, because remember, 1400s, 1500s, 1600s, these were the so-called voyages of discovery, where you had a lot of European ships going out to promote trade and etc. So tea was first taken to Holland, okay, into the 1600s, and from there it was sort of disseminated or moved out to other areas of Europe, including England. And then in England, this became the drink of choice. It actually crowded out any of the coffee houses. At one point, they actually had at least one coffee house on each corner on every street in London. But then the tea house actually, or the tea actually got to be served in coffee houses too. And of course, now the British are really, really associated with tea as well, right? High tea and etc. Finally then, it went to North America in the 1650s, okay? And the American colonials, because this is before there was a United States of America. This was in the 1650s. People really glommed onto tea and it became a favorite beverage, okay? What happened though was the colonists, or the colonials, as some people might call them, they preferred the smuggled tea that was smuggled in. So this is just a kind of dramatic painting of smugglers, okay? Because you had different kind of pirates and all kinds of people in the Americas at the time, a lot of adventurers and such, yeah? So the colonials, the colonists, preferred the smuggled tea. It was cheaper. It was cheaper. It wasn't as expensive as the ones that the English East India Company brought in, okay? So of course they would prefer the cheaper one that they didn't have to pay for so much. And these coffee shops were other places where people were talking business, getting together, social occasions and all that sort of thing. Okay, so what happened next is that the East India Company complained about this. They were saying, hey, we have all this surplus tea, and the colonials are buying this illegal tea. So what did they do? The English they actually passed something called the Tea Act of 1773. Okay, what happened after that? What was a response in the colonies to the Tea Act? Yeah? Think about that. Okay, you had a bunch of colonials, a bunch of these people, these men, what they did, they dressed up as Native Americans, Pawnee Indians, I think they called them at the time, and they dumped a lot of the tea that they were trying to bring in into Boston Harbor. This is what they call the Boston Tea Party, remember? From history, you guys would remember that. In fact, I'm kind of embarrassed to be telling you that because you folks should know that. This is like part of the education of every American child, Here's another depiction of it too, very important thing. And remember, you had the revolution going on in France too, or the beginnings of the revolution, you know, the French Revolution going on. So the Boston Tea Party, the various responses of this colonial, where they were angry because they were thinking, we're being taxed. They're being taxed on something when they had no representation. That was a big hue and cry. That was a big battle cry in terms of the Revolutionary War, is that these colonials, these who were citizens of England, were being taxed, but they didn't have any kind of representation in the houses of the Lords or the Houses of the Commons, you know, the parliamentary system that they had there in England, right? So that was a hue and cry, the battle cry, taxation without representation. It was unfair, and they did something about it, you know, okay? Furthermore, more history about that. Okay, so so coffee then de facto became the drink of choice in the colonies or in America eventually. Now in 1904, okay, they had the St. Louis. You know, they had one of those big expos in St. Louis. And then what happened was they had a heat wave. So this man, Richard Bleckeden, this looks like a Welsh name to me, Bleckeden. Anyway, so this fellow, Richard Bleckeden, he was trying to serve a new kind of tea, hot tea. Nobody was buying it because it was just too hot in St. Louis. So what he did is he put ice and he added lemon, and then it was a big hit. Okay, so now iced tea is sort of like the summer drink of the United States. Probably people drink more iced tea than they do even lemonade, you know? So iced tea, first thought about and first promoted by this fellow, Richard Bleckeden. I tried to find an image of him, but I couldn't. Another innovation, also in 1904, this other fellow, a dealer, you know, a merchant, he packaged tea in silk bags as samples to send to some different patrons and such. But the tea bag itself, people didn't want just the tea, they wanted the whole thing. So the tea bag, invented by Thomas Sullivan in 1904. Some people might decry, oh, you know, that's not such a good thing, because people sometimes like to make rituals of tea too, yeah? Which you're going to find out in a little bit. And of course, like in England, what would they do? They'd heat hot water, they'd have a strainer, you know, they'd have the tea leaves floating in the pot brewing, and then they'd pour the liquid through a strainer into the cup. That was one way that people made tea. A good thing about the tea bag in some ways is that the small pieces of tea leaves, which people would pretty much discard or not use very much, could be used in the tea bag. Whereas premium teas, even now, they tend to use whole leaf teas, you know, whole leaves and etc. So tea itself, amazing. It's probably even more popular than water. Tea is the world's most popular drink. About 800 million cups or glasses of tea are consumed by humans every day. 800 million. So when you think about it, that makes sense. When you think of the places in the world where people drink tea for their main drink, you have India, for one thing, you have China, two other places that tea might have originated in. Okay, plus other places, I think Russia too. Russian people are also big tea drinkers, you know, that area of where we have the former Soviet Union. I think they call it chai, yeah, in the Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union. They call it chai. Excuse me. Now we also have ceremonies and customs that we can talk a little bit about too with tea, okay? So, for one thing, British high tea. British high tea actually came about when a lady, you know, a lady of a landed gentry probably, because usually I think that the English people at the time, they only had like one main meal a day, and then they had a small meal, I think, in the morning, but at night is when they had their big meal, a big meal with meats and all kinds of stuff. But I think at the time, in country areas, people only ate one big meal a day. So what this lady, she said, I am so tired of feeling faint and feeling so weak and feeling so hungry. So what she did is that she initiated what they call a high tea. I guess they had tea, they had bread and butter, they had other kinds of sandwiches, they had pastries, you know, crumpets, different biscuits or cookies and things like that. But then, so she actually started this, and then it kind of caught on. And so British high tea, you can actually also have a high tea over, I think it's called the Waioli Tea Room, which is on Manoa Road. They do actually have a English style or traditional style high tea. That might be a nice treat if you want to take your girlfriend or a lady friend someplace, you know? It's very good. It's supposed to be very good quality food too, because they have cakes, they have tarts, they have pastries, they have sandwiches. It really is a really good, that could be your main meal of the day. And that is sort of like what the British high tea came to be. So it's quite substantial. In some places, like when people don't have a whole lot of money, their tea could be a cup of tea with maybe milk and sugar, or lemon and sugar, milk and sugar, and then what they'll have is they'll have bread and butter. Okay, that's basic kind of tea. But the more fancy it gets, of course, the more food you eat, you know? Okay, so generally you'd have brewed tea, and they put cream in it, maybe sweetener too. And we also have Russian teas. Okay, and Russian people would boil their tea in a contraption known as a samovar. Okay, I think you might remember this. I guess sometimes when you see historical romances and historical dramas like on Masterpiece Theater, one of the good things about watching some of those shows set in different times is you can kind of get an idea how people used to live, you know, just the everyday furnishings, the everyday utensils, things that they used, the way they lived, okay, even 100, 200 years ago. So Russians tend to serve their tea in glasses, okay, not in teacups necessarily, but tall glasses, and generally they'll stir in lemon, or they'd stir in a spoonful of jam, okay, in the hot tea that they drink in these glasses, okay. So in Russia, I guess they call tea, they call it chai, okay, C-H-A-I. All right, and then in Japan, they have Japanese tea ceremony, and in Japan they call it cha. Okay, I think people call it ocha. Usually in Japanese, if you put o before a word, it's like an honorific. You're actually giving honor to it. So sometimes when they're eating rice, they'll say o gohan, no gohan, I think, something like that. So I think it's sort of like o something. So when you say ocha, it's sort of saying like cha, you know, something that you honor in a way, something like that. Anyway, so the Japanese tea ceremony has to do with tea, which is powdered, whipped into a froth, and served in lacquerware, okay? And there's a nice picture showing this lady here, you know, sort of like part of the ceremony. It looks like she's heating up a metal pot. But an interesting thing is, yeah, so it's a whole thing. It's like a whole cult. And I think that the tea ceremony is sort of like an aspect of Zen Buddhism, which in China they call Chan Buddhism. And I think, in fact, that Bodhidharma might have been one of the founders of Chan Buddhism or in China. I think that he was supposed to have been a missionary too, or might be mixing him up with a different ascetic. But generally, tea in Japan and in China was used to keep people awake so they could pray or keep them in meditation. You know, some of those shows that you might have seen where you have these disciples are sitting like in a row and they're meditating, sitting like that, and then you see, you know, their priest or somebody who's supervising them walking around with this big bamboo stick, and he's hitting them, you know. He's actually helping them. He's actually helping them to stay awake so they can continue their meditations. It seems kind of funny, but you know, there are reasons for things, you know. So the tea ceremony actually came about as an offshoot, as a descendant of Zen Buddhism. And Zen is very hard to define. It's a very, very difficult kind of discipline to try to follow. But in it, they try to, they sort of feel like concentrating onto a particular kind of point, doing one or a few things perfectly, and with as much grace and as much beauty as you can. Okay, so a lot of the Japanese arts really came about in reference to Zen Buddhism. But Zen Buddhism is really not easy to actually do, really. You know, it's not easy. Okay, then furthermore, we also have people in India also have their traditional drinks too, called chai. So what is chai? Okay, chai, you know, similar to the chai of the Russians, not really similar because people do drink their tea different ways. So here you have a young man, a young fellow. Okay, he actually has boiled tea, okay, tea leaves, along with milk and along with spices and sugar probably, or some kind of sweetener, and then he's straining it, okay? So what is chai? Pretty much it's black tea. We're going to go into what black tea is in a little bit. And it's water, milk, and spices. Oh, and it's so good. This is another premium kind of drink that you can get at a fancy coffee shop. Expensive too, but it is so delicious, yeah? Some of the different kind of spices, among which that could be in there. You have cinnamon, and this is real cinnamon, because real cinnamon is made from the inner bark of the cinnamon tree. Cinnamomum, you know? What is it? Yes. And here you have cloves. Okay, cloves are actually the flower buds of a clove tree, cardamom seeds, black pepper, all right? We also, people can also put orange peel or ginger or nutmeg, okay? Star anise, okay? Or bay leaves and vanilla, any combination of all this stuff and maybe even more stuff as well. It really is delicious. No matter where you get chai, it's always good, you know? Now the plant, the tea plant itself, okay? It tends to be a relatively small tree. If you let it grow, as far as it'll grow maybe up to maybe 35 feet tall, okay? But generally people keep it shrubbed if they're using it to actually pick tea leaves from, okay? So generally when the plant is under cultivation, people prune it and pick at it to ensure the fact that it's going to make a shrub. What is a shrub? A shrub is a woody plant that has a lot of branches in it, yeah? It's like a hedge. So the more different branches are coming off, the more tea leaves you can pick, okay? And generally native to the tropics and the subtropics, and like coffee, okay? The best tea is from high elevation areas. High elevation areas where it's cool and it's moist, okay? So just like coffee, both of them are like this. Coffee and tea are like this. The plants like this kind of environment. So here you see a partial of a tea plantation. So you can see all these tea shrubs, all, you know, in a terraced in a way. Here you see the people picking tea because tea leaves have to be picked by hand, okay? Because what the people will do is they'll only take the top bud and the first two leaves of the thing. They'll pinch it off and they're picking this, so you have to hand pick tea, okay? So when you go to a fancy tea store, like there's one over in the Ala Moana Center, very expensive, but still very good teas. But part of what you're paying for, of course, when you go to a store like that, you're paying for the store itself, the location, the prestige of buying very expensive gift item like that, and also you're paying for the fact that you have people going out there picking things by hand. The more somebody has to handle it, the longer somebody has to hold on to something, the more expensive it is, okay? So generally when people are picking tea, they take only the bud at the tip and the top couple of leaves. Those are the only parts that they use for teas, okay, or at least good teas anyway. So there are different types of teas, even though they all come from the same type of plant. They all come from Camellia sinensis, okay? And first of all, you have green teas, and here's some green, you have some green leaves here. They're actually drying it, they're heating it and drying it. But you can see the green tea, even when it's dried, it's still green in color, okay? It hasn't been fermented at all, all right? Then we also have oolong teas, okay? Oolong tea, you can see from this, is sort of like a greenish, brownish in color. It's a little bit fermented about half the way, all right? So these are sort of half fermented, and then they're withered a little bit, but they tend to be a greenish brown, okay? Then we also have black tea. So here I couldn't actually get an image of black tea, but of course it has been fermented all the way and oxidized until the leaves themselves are very dark brown or black color, and it makes for a nice dark tea. Most of the tea that we drink in the United States is black tea, okay? And then nowadays, fairly recently, we have something on the market called white teas. White teas are the leaves that have hairs on them, leaves of the tea plant that have these downy hairs on them. That's why they call them white. When you actually brew this white tea, it's supposed to be very subtle. It's supposed to be very delicious. Okay, so the leaves are like this kind of yellow color. And when you actually make the beverage itself, okay, it's like an amber golden color. Okay, so this is white tea. So this is like the new thing. Whenever you have these premium gift items that people like to sell, people like to treat themselves with, they always like novelty, new stuff to introduce into the market to broaden their market share. That's sort of what business has to do. They have to make money. You know, that's just what they do. Okay, very delicious. I myself am a tea drinker. I like tea. I like any kind of caffeinated stuff, but coffee for me is too strong. Now, health effects. Now, tea is something that also has beneficial effects. Remember when we talked about coffee? Coffee is an antioxidant, okay? And it can also help you lose weight if that's what you want to do, okay? But generally, people who drink a lot of green tea, they tend to have a low rate of cancer, okay? That isn't in and of itself. So here you have excuse me, you have a normal cell dividing into two normal cells through mitosis. You have this normal cell dividing into two cells, one of which is abnormal, okay, or cancerous. But remember this, that whenever you have, if anything has a cell that's cancerous, generally the cell has to go through 3, 4, 5 mutations at least before a normal cell becomes a cancer cell. So cancer is not typical of people, okay, so you don't ever have to get cancer, okay. But one of the unusual things, one of the things that makes cancer cells so virulent, as a word, is that they can divide forever. They can continue dividing. Remember I told you that there was a lady, excuse me, there was a lady who died maybe in the 1950s, yeah? And her cells are still alive. They have her cells in culture, okay, someplace, all right? Anyway, so generally, if people drink a lot of green tea, generally those people tend to have low rates of cancer. I think they have done controlled double-blind studies of these things. So this breast cancer, prostate cancer rates tend to be reduced by maybe drinking green tea. This is supposed to be a X-ray, I think it is, or mammogram of a normal breast. And here's one that is supposed to be cancerous. I'm not a radiologist, so I won't hazard a guess as to what makes this one normal and this one cancerous. But still, you know, it's kind of scary, you know. I think no woman, I mean, this is something that really terrifies people, women, you know, of course. Okay, but even if somebody does have cancer, doesn't mean that they're going to have to die from it. All right. Now green tea. So here's another image of green tea. You can see it does still retain its green color in there. Okay, so green tea is good to drink. Okay. Maybe due to the chlorophyll as well as polyphenol. So they're thinking, what is the mechanism that allows green tea to kind of head off cancer that way? Some people think that maybe these substances called polyphenols, okay, it's a phenolic, what it does, it'll actually interfere with a particular enzyme that is needed for a cancer to grow, for an abnormal cell to keep dividing. Because remember, every kind of chemical reaction that happens inside of the cell is mediated or facilitated by an enzyme. Okay, so the polyphenols that are in green tea perhaps interfere with an enzyme that could be a cancer promoter. Okay. Excuse me, I'm getting over a cold. Now also, there's another thing. There's something called theophylline, pretty much caffeine of any kind. Okay, a small percentage of the caffeine will become this substance called theophylline in the human body. But in tea, unlike in coffee, theophylline is actually present. And here's like a little model. You can see it does look a little bit like the caffeine molecule too, yeah? And what it is, it's a bronchodilator, okay? So if somebody's having asthma problems, maybe they don't have their, what do you call that? I forgot what you call that thing. You know, that helps you breathe, inhaler, yep, thank you. Yeah, so, so if you don't have your inhaler, go drink a cup of coffee, drink a couple of cups of coffee, or tea. And this theophylline is a bronchodilator. It will actually allow your bronchial passages to not be so swollen. It'll help you to breathe, okay? So whenever you're having trouble breathing, sometimes theophylline can help. So tea has theophylline in it. So theophylline, if you remember, okay, is actually something that can help treat asthma, okay, in a gentle way. Now the next group we're going to talk about, a subject dear to many people's hearts, okay, especially women, all right? We have something called chocolate, okay? Theobroma cacao in the Sterculiaceae. So one of the things I want you to look at this word. What does this mean? Broma means food, like ambrosia, okay? Broma means food, and theo means God. Now theo, just like theology, is a study of religion or a study of religious, subjects. Theobroma means food of the gods, and that's how it was thought of. Okay, Theobroma cacao. Now, where did this originate? Probably in Mesoamerica, in Central America. Furthermore, this is another third one that we're talking about today, whose origins are, mysterious. The story goes that the Aztecs god Quetzalcoatl, okay, this fellow here, he's also known as the plumed serpent. There was a novel, I believe, or a story called The Plumed Serpent by D.H. Lawrence. So this is him in one of his incarnations, one of his forms, and this is Quetzalcoatl in a human form. Okay, so this god actually gave cacao beans to humans, okay, to allow them. So here we have another, story about how. So you can see in all three cultures, whether in Ethiopia, whether in Asia, China and India, and also here in Mesoamerica. Okay, plants are very much associated with divinity, with religion, okay, with life, and are the way we approach it, the way we look at life, the way we look at where we came from. Plants intimately associated in that way. Okay. So of course, native to Central America. So they think maybe cacao might have been domesticated in Central America and South America, independently of each other, right? And in Central America, okay, the Aztec Empire, it was consumed only by the highborn people, only by the aristocrats and priests. Now Columbus was exposed to it, but he didn't really get, he didn't really get it. He didn't really see how important it was. Now in Cortez in 1519, Hernando Cortez invaded Mexico. Here, boy, has a Spanish eyes and very stern-looking fellow, huh? And so he observed the emperor of the Aztecs, Moctezuma. This is actually not a misspelling because I guess what we call Montezuma, his name is more correctly pronounced Moctezuma. Okay, and he was drinking a drink called chocolatl. Okay, chocolatl. So what it was the roasted seeds of Theobroma cacao, ground, mixed with spices, and some of the spices included chili peppers and vanilla beans. Then this liquid was beaten to a froth and drunk that way. So the chocolatl of Moctezuma was completely different from the chocolate drink that we drink today. And chocolate, of course, is not just a drink. People might know it more intimately in form of chocolate bars and all that bad stuff, right? Anyway, so this drink was whipped to a foam and then consumed. From Central America, it was taken to Spain because, of course, Cortez was from Spain. It was taken to Spain, and the people in Spain added sugar, took out some of the spices, added sugar to make it better tasting to them, And then by 1650, it was throughout Europe. Okay, yikes, yikes. Okay, so I just wanted to show you something here under the Elmo. So this here is actually supplemental. These are actually chocolate nibs. These are actually chocolate seeds from Theobroma cacao. It is from this that the chocolate liquor and everything else. But this is actually something that they're selling for health food nowadays. Okay, raw chocolate, no sugar added and stuff. I've eaten a few of those, and it is actually bitter. It's very bitter. But you can taste a little bit of the chocolate taste, but it's not sweet. Okay, it's not sweet. It's bitter, in fact. So probably the drink that Moctezuma was drinking must have been bitter, spicy, all that kind of stuff. If you saw the movie Chocolat, right? Didn't the woman in there? I never saw that movie, but I heard that the woman in that movie actually put chili pepper in one of her drinks that she was making for somebody, right? Anyway, so then it spread throughout Europe. Yeah. Then in the 1800s, this fellow named Conrad van Houten, okay, removed the cocoa butter because a lot of people in Europe, even though people did drink this chocolate drink, some people didn't like it very much because the whole thing is like 40% fat. They had that cocoa butter in there. So, in the 1800s, this man, Conrad van Houten, removed the cocoa butter, and so it wasn't as greasy and oily a beverage as it was before because chocolate in Europe never really supplanted coffee or tea because it was just not that pleasant to drink. But when he made a process to remove the cocoa butter, it made it more palatable. Then later, Fry and Sons, this is actually one of their early corporate logos. Okay, there were a lot of Quaker people associated with the development of chocolate. Okay. In 1847, Fry and Sons actually made, added cocoa butter back, into that, and then added sugar and made the chocolate bar. Okay, isn't that amazing? Yes, the ingenuity of humans on nutrition. Okay, it has a lot of calories, 500 calories per 100 grams. Okay, 50% carbohydrates, including sugars. Okay, then you have 32% fat. That's a lot of fat. 8% protein, all right, in milk chocolate anyway. At the same time, Eating chocolate for many people is very pleasurable because the thing about the mouth feel, they actually formulate it so that when you put it in your mouth, it actually does melt. You can actually hold a piece of chocolate in your mouth and then it'll just, you know, melt like that. And it's very pleasurable. They have those great commercials on TV a little bit, you know, they're sort of erotic in a way. Anyway, so it's very pleasurable. And another thing too is that the chocolate has cannabinoids in it. What is cannabinoids? What kind of plant do you think cannabinoids is named after? Yeah, think about that, okay? It also has flavonoids, okay, which are other antioxidants, right? Theobromine is another one. Here, another one with another molecule that has a little bit of the configuration of the caffeine molecule. Now the plant itself, it's a relatively small tree, okay? And this is a plant that actually does not really live in the wild anymore because it has been thoroughly domesticated. It's not relatively small tree, and like the coffee tree, like the coffee tree, it needs to be protected. A lot of the different kind of chocolate varieties need to have like a nurse tree or something growing over them to protect them from too much sun and also from wind. They don't like a lot of wind. They can get damaged. They like it wet. They like warm temperatures, so the tropics and the subtropics are great. It has very small flowers, very small. This is probably about 1/4 of an inch wide, this flower. And then it grows to this huge fruit. I mean, the fruit is probably about 6 inches long, about this big, sort of football shaped. And it can be anywhere from like a pinkish color to like a brown. And the thing too is that the fruits don't fall off the tree. So a person has to actually come pick the fruit, break it open and plant the seed in order to do that. So it's a football-shaped fruit that has quite a few seeds in the pulp. You can eat the pulp as well. Did you know also that with a coffee cherry, you could also eat the pulp that's around the coffee seed as well? It's supposed to be edible. So the pulp is supposed to be really good. You can make a drink out of the pulp. You know, put a little bit of sugar, put some water, put the pulp and mix it up in there. It's almost like that juice that you can make from soursop. It's tart, it's sweet, and if you have these little seeds floating in it, you can crunch on the seeds to get that little bit of bitter chocolate kind of taste, you know? How do they process it? First, they ferment the seeds, they dry the seeds, and then they roast them, all right? And what actually forms the nibs are the cotyledons, okay? These are actually the ones that people use to get what they call the chocolate liquor from, okay? So what they'll do, they'll crush that and then they get this chocolate liquor. And then what they'll do usually is that they'll try to separate out most of the cocoa butter, and then you get a powdery cake sort of thing. Then when you add that with sugar, add in a little bit of the cocoa butter, add in vanilla, add in milk, then that's what we call chocolate in the United States. Okay, so this is actually a plant that started out as a drink, and we mostly consume it as a food until it gets to be wintertime and you're craving a cup of hot chocolate, you know, to kind of sit, and you can kind of sit in your living room talking story with your family or watching TV and have hot chocolate. That's really pleasant, you know. Okay, now another interesting thing too is that the cocoa butter is a major component of what we call white chocolate, okay? Now the white chocolate, you know, according to the FDA, according to your text, is not considered, it's not really legally chocolate because it doesn't have any chocolate liqueur in it. Okay, isn't that weird? Even though the cocoa butter comes from the cocoa plant, you know, and that is a major component of white chocolate. I think white chocolate is okay, but I don't know. Yeah, I'm a binge eater too, so it's like, yeah. So I try not to keep candy in the house and that kind of stuff. Sometimes if I really need to eat chocolate, maybe I'll go to the drugstore, I'll buy 3 bars and I'll just eat them one after another. That's just binge eating. Okay, anyway, but chocolate too, there's a sobering side to it too, and this is really true, okay? There's a high price to pay for chocolate because in the Ivory Coast, which is on the west part of Africa, there have been allegations, there have been news stories since I think 2001 that they're actually child slaves, not just child slaves, slaves, and some of them children that are kind of taken from their families and moved over there to the Ivory Coast. They're put to work under very bad conditions. And another thing too is that, so there, some people, including Mother Jones magazine, I think, and also the Mutiny Reader, a lot of those rather left-leaning publications, years ago they're saying that we should boycott chocolate, all chocolate, because a lot of the chocolate that comes into the United States does come from the Ivory Coast. And once, you know, what happens is that the brokers buy the chocolate, they can't tell where it comes from. okay, about 40% of the chocolate consumed in the United States is actually from the Ivory Coast. So whether you're going to buy Godiva chocolate or from the Honolulu, or won't mention that name. Anyway, so if you're buying it from a really swanky store, or you're buying candy bars like me, you know, at the drugstore, you can't tell where they came from. Okay, so some people call for a complete boycott of chocolate. I think I actually did that for almost a year. I didn't have any chocolate at all. Even people gave me chocolate and I didn't eat it, you know. But we'll see. Maybe I'll start doing that again. Really, the thing too, this is shocking. This is really shocking, but it's true. Did you know in the world right now, in the world that we live in today, there are more slaves in the world now than there's ever been in human history? I knew a woman who's a social worker, and she goes to conferences and stuff like that. She said that. This is something that came up at a conference that she went to. Today, you know, in 2000 whatever, you know, we have more slaves in the world now than any other time in history. Okay, it's very shocking. Okay, so 40% of chocolate is from the Ivory Coast. Okay, then we're going to talk about Coca-Cola, okay, and others. So the cola tree, Cola nitida, okay, is a source of cola, all right? Circulaceae in the same family, okay, as chocolate. The seeds are fermented, dried, and crushed. Okay, it was thought up in 1886 by John Stith Pemberton. His original recipe is locked up in a safe someplace. Coca-Cola, okay? Has carbonated water, caramel coloring, coca leaf extract, and cola seed extract. So of course, nowadays they don't use cocaine or the cocaine part of the coca leaf anymore, though they do use part of the coca leaf now. Also sugar, vanilla, cinnamon, lime juice. It's a proprietary recipe. Okay, sugar, vanilla, cinnamon, limes, all good. We also have mate from Central and South America, guarana, okay, from Brazil. I think it's called guarana, okay? Another caffeinated sort of thing here, okay? And here's some powder. Here we go, all right? So here we have a nice drink. I've never tasted this. I have tasted mate, and it's pretty good, all right? Summary. So actually, okay, we're going to go into the summary, and then we're going to get into a next part. Okay. First of all, the summary, all right? Caffeine, we get into caffeine and its pluses and minuses, and it's all its contributions to humankind, including democracy, all right? Alkaloids as well, okay? So caffeine is alkaloids. Coffee, tea, and chocolate. Now, lastly, okay, Coca-Cola, that's something else as well, okay? So next, we're going to talk about something, okay? So this actually is going to be the last kind of in studio lecture. We do have, you know, some more coming up, but first of all, we have to ask you to do something for us, okay? What I'll do is I'll offer you an incentive. So if you do actually do this and you send me an email telling me that you've done this, then I will give you your grade, okay, as soon as I can, all right, at the end of the class. Now we're going to go to the survey thing. Alrighty, so the survey here, okay? First of all, you need to get onto WebCT, open a web browser, Internet Explorer or Netscape. Okay? Then in the URL or address box, you type in this address. Take a look at this. Write it down. I'll give you a minute. Okay? Then select the appropriate responses to the questions. Select the Submit My Survey button. Press the button to save your responses. And then you are finished. Okay? Okay, and then we're finished too. Okay, so hopefully you've enjoyed this, hopefully even at half as much as I have, because if you have enjoyed this even half as much as I have, you'll be happy. Okay, anyway, so we'll see you next time. Okay, aloha, take care, bye-bye.